Thank you so much. So we're really going to shift gears here and think about some of the secondary effects of the pandemic and how families helped one another during that. So this is research from part of a larger project that looks at the family support during the pandemic, and it's joint work with folks at Syracuse, at Bowling Green State University, at UCLA, and at the Harris School at Chicago. Um, so just to give everyone a little bit of context, families are incredibly important in terms of caring for older adults. So the care that family members give to adults with activity limitations is worth about $600 billion a year. And adult children are a big part of this system of family care. They're about half of the primary caregivers for community dwelling older adults who receive care. And while kids are very good about giving their parents time help, they also give them money. So in general, parents tend to give their kids money for most of their lives. But when parents get old, and particularly when they have declining health or when they face sort of economic distress, there is evidence that adult children do step in and also provide their parents with money help. So when we think about this in the context of the pandemic increased the need for help among older adults and among everyone, right? So while actually the economic impact of the pandemic on older adults was actually slightly smaller than it was for younger adults, it was longer lasting. Um, and also, older adults faced additional challenges, and in particular, they faced logistical obstacles for things like getting food, partially because of the safety of going to the grocery store, for example, but also because things like using apps and things to do grocery delivery were more difficult for older adults. And as a consequence of this, during the first few months of the pandemic, food insecurity increased a lot among older adults. It increased by 75% compared to pre-pandemic levels. And usually when these bad things happen to older adults, their adult children step in to help them. But as you know, especially during the first year of the pandemic, bad things were happening to everyone, right? And so while older adults were more needy, their kids were also more needy. Their adult children were also more needy. So on the one hand, we know that adult children did step in to sort of provide unpaid care when paid care became very difficult to obtain for older adults who had lots of health difficulties. So, for example, um, older adults moved in with their children to avoid going to nursing homes and things like that. But on the other hand, middle-aged adults had lots of challenges, including the fact that many of their kids weren't in school, which may have limited their ability to provide sort of care that was not like, absolutely medically necessary. And also, if you remember back to that time, we were very nervous about infecting our grandmothers and parents with the illness. And so we, in some sense, tried to maintain physical distancing wherever possible. And so, it could be that it was difficult for kids to provide the things they would normally do because of the need for physical distancing. So this project or this paper that I'm talking about looks at how responsive kids were with money and time help during the pandemic, and whether they were responsive to specific needs. That is, did they give money when their parents needed money, and did they give time when their parents needed time? And we've also been interested in whether kids were more responsive to their parents' needs during the pandemic than they had been in the past. And one reason this is interesting is to try to think about whether this is something that going forward we might expect to see more of, or whether this was just part of like what kids always do. Okay, so we're going to use data from the Health and Retirement Study to answer this question. The Health and Retirement Study is a nationally representative longitudinal study of older adults. It's been ongoing since 1992 and is sort of the gold standard for studying the health and well-being of older adults in the United States. In 2020, they conducted a special module for respondents who were interviewed after May of 2020, in which people were asked about transfers of time and money that were given to and received from others outside of their household because of the pandemic. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what they were specifically asked in a little bit. But this is also a study that's longitudinal, so it's been going on every year. And the people who were interviewed in 2020 were also most of them were also in the study in 2016 and 2018. And so we also use information from the past to ask this question about whether kids were more responsive now than they had been in the past. And this comes from the regular core interview, which includes lots of demographic, economic, family, and health characteristics, as well as questions about time and financial help received from adult children in the context of needing help with activities of daily living or instrumental activities of daily living, including help providing and preparing food. So it's really hard to figure out exactly how to nail down exactly what caused what during the pandemic, because if you remember, everything was happening at once, and what caused what is a big chain that's difficult to unravel. So we kind of use this like complementary strategies where we look at different ways of looking at this question and see if we get the same answer when we look at it several different ways, and then use that to kind of triangulate a conclusion. So the two ways I'm going to talk about today is, first, we just use what parents say they needed and what they got from their kids during the pandemic. And then we also look at what happened in the past. So we're going to look at change over time from 2016 to 2020 as a way to answer this question about whether kids became more responsive during the pandemic than they had been in the past. We use a sample of about 6,000 older adults who participated in the 2020 COVID-19 module, but were also interviewed in the 16, 18, and 20 core. We use people who are age 55 and older because the cohort aged, and so we want to keep the age group consistent. And we include people who have at least one non-co-resident child because the questions that were asked were about help from people outside your household. So in terms of what they were asked in the COVID module, they were asked, because of the pandemic, did anyone living outside your household, such as a parent, adult, child, other relative, or friend, help you with money or by paying bills? And if so, who was that? And did they help you with shopping for groceries, errands, rides, or chores? And if so, who was that? People were also asked about challenges that they faced. So they were asked if they missed any regular payments, like on their rent or mortgage or other bills, whether they couldn't pay medical bills or whether they didn't have enough money to buy food. And we consider someone to have experienced economic hardship if they report any of those. And about 13% of the sample did report that they had economic hardship. Respondents were also asked if they had trouble buying food even though they had money. And so we're going to think about that as them having trouble buying food for non-financial reasons. And about a similar percentage, about 14% of the sample, reported that they had trouble buying food for non-financial reasons. In the core survey, they're asked slightly different things. So the concepts are the same, but the exact measurement is a little bit different, which actually I think helps us in terms of this triangulation approach, because we don't want our conclusions to be based on exactly certain question wording or types of help that was received. So in the core survey, people are asked if they received money from their children and if they received $500 or more over the past 2 years. They're also asked if they receive time help for things like meal preparation and shopping for groceries. So that's our measure of time help from the core. In the core survey, they're also asked about need. So we code someone as experiencing hardship if they report missing rent or mortgage payments or not having enough money to buy food. And we record them as having trouble buying food for non-financial reasons if they have difficulty shopping for groceries because of health or memory problems. So you can see that in that's sort of linked to a health problem, whereas in the COVID-19 module, it's not linked to that health problem. The survey, of course, is very big and gives us lots and lots of controls that I'm not going to talk to, but what I'm going to show you is all net of those controls. And because we have people interviewed over time, we're able to use prior waves information about your income and health so that we're not looking at things that are happening at the same time. We're controlling for your prior circumstances. So I'll show you a little bit of the results. So here, this shows the coefficients on models that predict money and time help that older people receive from their adult children. So what these show on the left-hand side is that when parents reported that they had economic hardship, they were 6.4 percentage points more likely to report that they received money from their kids. But if they reported economic hardship, they weren't more likely to receive time help from their kids. That's that 0.1%, right? Similarly, if they reported that they had trouble buying food for non-financial reasons, they were 7.7 percentage points more likely to say that a child helped them. But if they reported that they had trouble buying food, they weren't more likely to get money help from their kids. So this shows us that kids were responsive to the needs their parents have. That is, they gave money for money problems and time for time problems, right? But that doesn't really say anything about whether this was changed over time. So here what we're looking at is we're looking at that same thing. We're looking at how having hardship affects the probability that you get money from your kid. And we're looking at that in 3 different waves in 2016, 2018, and 2020. And similarly for food, we're looking at how having trouble buying food for non-financial reasons affects the probability that you get money from your kids in 16, 18, and 20. And what we can see here on the left is that only in 2020 does having economic hardship predict getting money from your kids. If in earlier waves, having economic hardship does not increase the probability that you get money from your kids. So here we can conclude that kids were more responsive to financial needs during the pandemic than they had been in the past. But in none of the waves did they respond to having trouble buying food by giving their parents money. In time help, we have something similar. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at whether having economic hardship predicts your kids giving you time help. And you can basically see in all of the years, there's very small associations between having economic hardship and getting time help from your kids. And you can see on the right-hand side that in every wave, having trouble buying food for non-financial reasons increases the probability that you get help from your kids. But what you can see if you compare 2016, 2018, and 2020 is that in 2020, experiencing trouble buying food for non-financial reasons increased the probability that you get time help from your kids by 20 percentage points, compared to only about 10 percentage points in earlier waves. And so this shows that kids were more responsive to their parents' time needs in 2020 than they had been in the past. So just to summarize, what we find is that adult children were quite responsive to their parents' specific pandemic-related needs. That is, they gave parents money when they needed money, and they gave parents time help when they needed help for non-financial reasons. And we also showed that adult children were more responsive to their parents' needs during the pandemic than they had been in the past. And I think that runs contrary to a lot of the sort of concerns during the pandemic, which is that older adults would sort of be abandoned and alone. In fact, we find that their kids were more responsive. There are lots of limitations. We're just looking at the first year, and we're relying on parents' reports, but this is like a gold standard survey. And so we feel like these are pretty robust findings. I'll just acknowledge that this was funded by NIA, and the grant number is there. We're very grateful to the funding, and this has been published recently in the Journal of Marriage and Family, and the citation is below. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.